everyone, today's episode is on financial planning that all Indian parents must consider. With rising costs of education and lifestyle, a lot of you have requested us for financial planning options that parents must consider before and after having a baby, and that is just what we are going to talk about today. Joining us today, we have Dr. Renu Pothen, who is a research head at fundsupermart.com, a transactional platform for mutual fund investments. A keen eye for research and global markets is what brings a fresh perspective to the investment industry. She holds the merit of serving as a mutual fund expert on money control and contributes to many financial dailies, webzines and TV shows. Welcome, Dr. Ray.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. One trend that I've observed is that most of the parents, they start saving or even investing for the children only after they start school or even much later.
Sure.
And the other trend that we have observed is that, like our parents, I mean, they've all saved and invested.
Yes.
And, they've made us achieve our goals using fixed deposits and PPF. These are the two These have been the two favorite instruments of our parents.
Right.
But the question is, can we use the same instruments and achieve the goals for our children 20 years later? This is where I would like parents to diversify their surplus into other instruments as well. And here I'm talking about the equity markets. Because equity as an instrument or as an asset class is known to have created wealth over a long time period. I understand that it is a volatile asset. It is very, very aggressive, but we have to also think that it is for our long term. So maybe a single digit return will not be able to beat inflation also.
A lot of favorite amongst the Indian families, especially with parents who have girls, they always end up saving a lot of gold and making a lot of investments in gold. So, do you think in the markets and the lifestyle that we're leading today, that's an investment that a parent has to consider or must consider?
I think gold as an investment opportunity can be considered. That's why I said. So when you invest for your children, it can't be just one instrument. We need to diversify into different instruments that's available, because only then we'll be able to achieve the goals. The first requirement that couples should think over is that they should have an emergency fund, which means at least 6 months of expenses. That should be set before you move into the single income family. My advice would be that you can stop the investments if you're not able to maintain that, but don't withdraw the investments. There are two ways that you can do. If you're doing it through the mutual funds route, you have the systematic investment plans. So that is, you can use it for your long-term plans. Now, what is the advantage of doing that? So that you don't have to put a lump sum amount suddenly, and you don't have to track markets.
Right.
Where you can invest a small amount of money, put it there for around 12 months or 2 years, but don't put the recurring deposit for 10 years or so.
Right.
Because you're playing with interest rates, and if you put it for 10 years, because your interest rate is also fixed in that deposit, so you don't know how it's going to be 5 years from now. It can be lower or it can be higher. So you have to make sure that your recurring deposit should be for a short period of time. Well, mutual funds, SIP can go on for a long term, but it's not like that we invest for 10 years and we forget. You have to review the portfolio and your funds on a regular basis.
Sure. Is there a ratio or is there a number that so much, that out of your monthly income after tax, this is the minimum amount that you should be, investing or looking at investments for?
Your take-home salary, you can invest, or you should ideally invest. And one important point here I want to say is that every year, depending upon the increment in salaries, how it's increasing, you'll also have to increase your savings. It can't be 10% every year. If we have an aspiration of sending our children abroad, we should first actually find out what is the cost, and then we have to put an inflation number and see what is it going to be after 15 years. Then accordingly you start saving and investing, but you should have an amount with you.
And what would you recommend as investment options for parents?
One of the instruments that normally I recommend to parents is mutual funds route. And the reason is that the exposure that it gives into the equity markets. And studies have shown that investments into the markets definitely reap benefit in the long term. And when you're looking at an investment of 15-20 years, that's, I think, one of the best instruments that you have. The reason is very simple. If you normally, before, parents used to save for their children in their own names. So if there is any emergency that comes out, immediately money gets moved out. So there is an emergency at home, or there's something that you require money, then you forget that money has been set aside for the education of the child. So make sure that you have a minor account which is in the child's name. I think that both insurance and mutual funds are two different instruments. And one thing that I don't agree is that parents confuse insurance and investments. You have to take an insurance. So when you have a child, you definitely have to have a term insurance. There is no second thought on that. But investments cannot be clubbed with our insurance, because they're two different things. Right. Insurance is you're taking a life cover. Yeah. Investments is you're trying to reach life goals. So one thing that I would like to tell parents, where both of them are working, is that make your own investments. Both of you should have investments. It can't be that one person is saving and one person is doing the expenses. Both of you have to save and invest as well, because if there's any emergency like this, because you can't start saving and investing after something has happened. Right. There's one more thing that I would like to tell parents is that today nomination has become mandatory for so many instruments. And one thing parents have to know is that most of them, I see, is most of the instruments that they have saved or that they've invested, nominees are just children. Right. I think that's something that parents should be a little bit more careful about. It's a nice question, but how do you make that happen? So that's a decision that cannot be made 2 years before you think of retirement. You have to think. You have to work the numbers backwards, because it can't be like 2 years. You decide today that okay, next 2 years I'm going to be 50 and I'm going to retire. Right. It's not going to be easy with the kind of lifestyle that we are in. One mistake that they make is that they don't start early.
They should all start early and start before having a baby, or soon after having a baby, within the first 1 year, versus looking at it from a primary education.
Exactly. So you can't think about the education cost of your child after the child entering school. You have to start thinking about it once immediately. Even before the child is born, or after the child is born, immediately you can start saving. There is no restriction on that. So start early, because that's where the compounding actually benefits you. The more time you give your money to multiply, the better it is for the parent. The second mistake that parents make is they continue to put in fixed income guaranteed products which give you, returns which are not going to beat inflation over the long term. So invest, diversify the basket, put into markets as well. Have your fixed income instruments, but have enter the markets via the mutual funds route. And the third thing is that clubbing insurance and investment. Insurance must be taken for your child. Term insurance must be taken as a parent. That's your first responsibility. But investment should be done separately into different instruments. So these are the different categories that you have. But the question is, do you need to enter into all these categories? Is something that you have to decide. So suppose you are an aggressive investor and you want to do an SIP into different funds, then you go into a very aggressive portfolio. You make your own portfolio. It should not be like 20 funds. There should maximum be 8 to 10 funds, and it should be your maximum exposure should be a good amount of exposure should be into the volatile segment, which is your mid and small cap segment, and then you should also have a small proportion in large caps and multi caps as well. Make that allocation, and if you're okay with sectoral funds, because they go through cycles, and sometimes it takes more than 7 years for funds like maybe infrastructure funds to perform. So if you're okay with that kind of volatility, only enter, especially if it's a child's portfolio. If you're not okay with that kind of a volatility, please don't enter sectoral funds. Stick to simple large cap, multi cap, mid cap funds, and a balanced fund as well in your SIP portfolios. One more thing that you need to remember is that, so when you're planning for your 15 years for your child's education, you will not want to put in debt instruments. That's not an option that I see parents normally doing. Especially in mutual funds, you can take a short-term fund and give a little bit of allocation there, but ideally you would be mostly into equities, because you would have your fixed income basket full actually, because you would be saving in other instruments as well outside the mutual funds. So what you can do is 2 years before the child is about to enter the college education, please make sure that all the investments from the equity market is moved and put into fixed income instruments, because the investments there cannot be subject to volatility for 2 years, because what all the surplus that we have made cannot just go away if markets decide to go in their own manner.